I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. For as long as there has been higher education, we have debated its true purpose: workforce training or leadership and citizenship building. Faced with the buffeting winds of the Industrial Revolution, Yale University in 1828 issued a report reaffirming a classics based education, and scientific schools fell into low enrollment, low funding, and closure for several decades thereafter, only to be revived by the Second Industrial Revolution and the Civil War's end. Science and technology schools became firmly established in the country's leading universities, and land grant schools pursued mechanical arts, agricultural methods, and military training. The contemporary version of this debate, whether high school and college are adequately preparing students for productive enterprise, occurs at a time when higher education is beset by challenges similar to those of the industrial revolutions. First, a political and cultural contest between status confirmation and democratization. Second, an economic contest between the time and credit model and more flexible credentialing, which in the 19th century used to be called partial courses. Is college still for everyone? After about 40 years of saying yes, the winds appear to be shifting. Not for everyone, we say now. But if not college, then what? In 2023, the Maryland legislature set up a commission to expand apprenticeships in the state, and this last month, the commission released its interim report. Commission Chair Jacob Shue, a Baltimore-based technology entrepreneur, and Commission member Jim Rosapep, state senator from College Park, the home of the University of Maryland, joined the show to talk about the report, the trade-offs between college and apprenticeships, and really the nature of education in this labor market.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by UMBC's Political Science Program, where you'll learn to shape public policy, impact communities, and function at the center of modern society. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning, especially when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Cat Scan, an art pop rock band from Washington, D.C. Paul Chaperas on bass and vocals, Kevin Kingsley on guitars and saxophone, and Mason Shelby on synths and percussion. Their latest album, reflecting the time and this cultural moment, is called Everything is Normal. To feel better, go see them live. You can find out where they are playing on their Facebook and Instagram pages. If you have difficulty finding them, we share their events on I Hate Politics socials. Jacob Shue, Jim Rosapep, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Great to be here with you.
Great to be here.
The Apprenticeship 2030 Commission, which its work is now done and it's a report ready to be put out. Before we get into the findings and recommendations, can you please speak to how apprenticeships are currently organized in the state of Maryland, perhaps I would imagine the rest of the country even?
For 80 years, the United States has had a federal and state structure of registered apprenticeships. It is a job with related classroom instruction, on-the-job training, and work, where the individual is paid by the employer. So The states can regulate them on their own if they want to. And Maryland is one that for decades has registered apprenticeships. Since Maryland is not that different from other states, they've been predominantly in the construction trades, and not in IT, not in healthcare, not in other areas. So it's a system that works well in the construction business, and as we'll get into, works well in other countries. And we're trying to bring that joy to Maryland.
Jake?
Our friends in the trades have really set the gold standard producing quality apprenticeships from the worker perspective, from the supply side. But I think also the demand side, all the jobs of the future, all the occupations that are available right now, where employers are saying that they cannot fill them. There's a persistent skills gap in this, right? How do we make it so that employers really recognize this as a mainstream workforce strategy versus, quite frankly, philanthropy or an experiment? This isn't just recruiting from the open market. Right. This is an investment from employer standpoint. They're being paid while they're learning. Right. And so part of our registered apprenticeship process is ensuring that there are standards for classroom and related technical instruction, that there's standards for on-the-job training, there's standards for wage progression, ensuring that there was alignment in terms of incentives and quite frankly, the investment model for employers to activate.
Traditionally, registered apprenticeships were in the hands of unions who brought in people, trained them, and put them in union shops. And then there was this vast other space where these kinds of relationships did not exist. And if young people were brought in order to train, we didn't call them apprenticeship, we called them internship. Maybe distinguish between an internship and a regular apprenticeship.
There are significant non-union registered apprenticeships in the construction industry. It's not just unions. And the unions, even when they're involved in it, they're doing it together with their employers. An internship is not an apprenticeship. Why is it not an apprenticeship? Often unpaid, let's start there. There are no standards. It's whatever the employer decides to do. It's not a career track. And I'll give you the example that I always give, which is we have interns in Annapolis, and they're great kids. Many of them come from the University of Maryland, some from UMBC, other places. But my former chief of staff, when I would ask her, where are we in getting the interns for this session? At one point, she got exasperated with me. She said, I know you want interns, but we have them here for 4 months. It takes a month to train them. They're productive for, a month and a half, and then they're thinking what they're going to do next. It takes so much of my time. And the point she was making was neither the intern nor the employer has an investment in that person's career. They're here today and gone tomorrow. The apprentice and the employer are investing their time and commitment, and in the case of the employer, money. They want that person to stay at least in the industry and hopefully with the employer. So it's a whole different model.
Internships really from an employer standpoint, it's really an audition. If you talk to large employers, they'll tell you most internship programs, it's a loss. They're not expecting interns to produce a lot of work for them. One of the challenges, of course, is that, a lot of these internships, because there are no standards, it's skewed towards a certain socioeconomic group. Came into this commission talking about activating employer demand in the first year. And then what we really came to realize very quickly through that process of our first year was we don't need to activate demand. There's a lot of demand for work. What we need to do is help employers understand that registered apprenticeships are a better model for satisfying that demand. You look at the world of cybersecurity, you can't really teach that in a classroom. What matters most is the threat that actually just occurred yesterday or last week, right? Not the threat that occurred a year ago, right? There's already defenses against that. The techniques and the methods are changing so quickly that you really need to be doing it side by side with practitioners. A person who isn't yet a quote unquote level 1 entry level worker, if they come in with skills that are not quite there yet, you can actually rapidly accelerate their learning on the job through that through that flow of the work.
I'm wondering whether having union shops has anything to do with where apprenticeships have proliferated versus where they have not been.
There's a technical answer to that, which is that in construction, the federal laws dealing with what's called prevailing wage for government projects has incentivized apprenticeships.
Can you explain that?
The federal law requires construction projects paid for by the government that workers be paid X wage, unless if the person is what they call a journey worker.
You can pay them less if they are an apprentice.
You can pay them less if you're an apprentice.
How do you apply that to technology businesses non-union shops.
When we were really thinking about a new model for public tools and accelerators, we were really thinking about a pay per apprentice program, right? As opposed to providing incentives that are based on some activity or process that you put a person through, like, oh, we put them into a training program, right? We really wanted to incentivize based on an outcome, a result. Right? A person completed the training program, right? There's something you get. Actually, you're hired on the job, right? Into a first step, you're getting another incentive, right? So it's really more of an outcome or a result-driven sort of approach towards this. There was a real focus on youth apprenticeships when we first began this, and that's obviously clearly a high priority. But right now, you look at the world of adult learners, right? You look at the world of people who are mid-career, right? And they're going to need to kind of go through some reskilling, some sort of job transformation or skill transformation, because again, everything is changing so quickly right now.
Did you do any accounting of how many apprenticeships are currently available in the state of Maryland?
It's somewhere around 11,000, I believe, currently registered apprenticeships in our state. However, the reality is that there are multiple factors more of employer-sponsored training programs out there, right? There are internships, there are training programs, there are all sorts of employer investments in workforce development. They're just not registered apprenticeships.
Let me add to that. Only about 60% of Maryland high school graduates even start college. And enough of them drop out by the age of 25 that most Marylanders, and this is nationwide too, in their late 20s have no degree. Now, most of them have not spent money for a degree, so they're the lucky ones. But then they're the ones who spent money for a degree and didn't get a degree. The whole system we have, and I wouldn't say K through 12, because it's really more 10, 11, and 12. And the whole college university structure and all the government training structures are all train and pray. Study, get some kind of credential and hope somebody hires you. It's not working. We can see it all around us. And what the apprenticeship model does is flips that. By hiring the person and having the classroom instruction be parallel and integrated with the on-the-job training, it's just much more efficient. And it's being done at scale in other countries.
If it makes so much sense, why didn't we do it before?
We sort of get it confused where education and higher learning is workforce. In reality, they're different, right? They serve different purposes to some extent. I've done tech apprenticeships for most of my career here in Baltimore City. We've had over 3,000 people come through a software development apprenticeship model. About half of the people who came into the apprenticeship programs that we did here didn't have a college degree. But what we found interestingly is as they completed the apprenticeships and they got into work and they became successful software developers. By the way, on average, they were making about almost six figures within 5 years in terms of salaries. About half the people who came in without degrees went back to college and got a degree. This idea that you have to go to college first to be able to get the job, I think is actually is really a misperception.
In the United States, for the past several decades, we've had a college for all bubble. That has driven investment into college for all, and we don't have college for all. In fact, most people don't get a degree. In Maryland, for example, we invest every year over $2 billion of taxpayer money in our public higher education system. And we invest less than $100 million in training, forget apprenticeships, training, including apprenticeships for everybody else. No wonder we have a skills shortage. The system has become so skewed towards one model. And the model does some good things, but it hasn't solved our economic productivity and workforce problems.
You have taken a very institutionalized approach to building this out. But the fight, to me, is cultural.
I disagree with that. It's cultural in the college-educated bubble. It's not cultural in the broad society. There's polling that proves overwhelmingly. And that's why in the legislature, we have this broad support, because it's commonsensical to most people, except you get some questions in the college-educated bubble that I did it, therefore everybody should do it. And I've heard this. I got to where I did. I don't want to leave people behind. And your point is there are things you can get in college that you can't get not in college. I live in College Park. I got that. Some of them are very good. Some of them are not so good, like drinking 3 nights a week, but that's okay. But people talk about the college experience, and it's an experience. The problem is much of the experience, not all of the experience, but much of the experience is not focused on skills that help you make a living.
What are you buying in college, right? You're buying a credential, right? And that's kind of why it's aspirational, right? And that's the challenge, right? Is that, we've created a credentialing cartel, right? That is basically created this kind of incentive, right? And that's why the incentives are aligned around like continuing to say you got to go to college, right? Because that's the way that you get the aspirational credential. I personally would love to see a different system in the future where you go to college later, right? You work before you go to college. Just like it used to be in grad school, right? You should actually go work in a job for a few years before you go to grad school. I think the same thing probably applies to undergraduate in the future. When you start looking at the world of youth apprenticeships, we made it really hard for young people to work while they're in high school.
So one of the issues there is that the school day is the way it is structured. What would you change?
Before the Apprenticeship 2030 Commission, we passed the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, or the so-called Kirwan Commission, Plan for Educational Reform. And in there, we set the goal that we want 45% of our high school graduates to have completed the high school level of registered apprenticeship, meaning working part-time generally in high school. These exist. I'll give you an example. In Prince George's County, they've had for 5 years, I guess, a building maintenance apprenticeship where the kids take construction-related career and technical education courses in their junior year. The summer between their junior and senior year, they work full-time in the building maintenance department in the school system under experienced maintenance folks. They go back, they take their senior year, whatever courses they still need, including their second level of classroom training in maintenance, building-related stuff. They graduate from high school, they go to work full-time in the building maintenance department in the school system, and then they take additional 2 levels of courses, classroom courses in the occupation at the community college. That model can be done across occupations, and we can blow up the high school schedule. And so that is in the works right now.
You want to blow up the high school schedule? What would it look like?
It would look like it does in other countries which have done this, where you may go to school 1 day a week and work 4 days a week, or you may go to school for 1 week a month and you work 3 weeks a month. The CTE committee of the Governor's Workforce Board and the State Department of Education are working right now, pushing out those models.
You have proposed a centralized system for building this structure that the market itself would not build on its own.
Absolutely, right. It's a market failure. That's exactly right. It's exactly right.
Why do you think a centralized structure would succeed when the market failed?
Because it's worked in other major industrial countries. I go down the list: Germany, Switzerland, Austria, UK, France, Australia. And it requires a structure. That's exactly what it requires. And it requires investment of public money. You put all this money to put people in college. Everyone goes to college. If we put money into apprenticeship, it'll scale up. And in fact, we already have little experiments with that here in Maryland. We call it pay per apprentice, as Jake mentioned. So for each apprentice, the sponsor of the apprenticeship gets a certain amount of money, which helps pay for the classroom training costs, for the cost of the mentor, for the on-the-job training. This is like kind of simple, actually. It's not that complicated, but it's a market failure that has to be fixed by public policy and public investment.
What is the public investment that would be required to do this on scale?
Our estimates are in the range of several hundreds of millions of dollars. And remember, public higher education in Maryland today gets over $2 billion every year.
Is the proposal to take money from the higher education system and put it into apprenticeship?
No, it's just it gives you a sense of scale. We also propose, and the governor has introduced legislation that I'm sure we're going to pass this session, to begin putting about $10 million a year into this effort.
10 million and hundreds of millions is how long would it take you to scale up?
We obviously right now have both state budget problems and we have catastrophe at the federal level. This is not the year to solve the problem all in 1 year. But this is the year with the report to lay out the pathway. When UK went from about where we are to a scale we want to get to, it took them about 15 years.
The traditional apprenticeship is 10,000 hours. How are you going to change that?
We have some minimum hours in terms of what we call RTI, the related technical instruction. I believe, what was that, 156 hours, something like that?
144 hours a year is what's the typical for the classroom instruction.
And then there's some minimum standards around the on-the-job training period. But generally speaking, you see a wide range of what these apprenticeship programs be. I mean, what you've mentioned in terms of the trades is the kind of traditional 5-year. In the world of IT, most apprenticeships are somewhere between 9 months to 24 months.
Well, there also now are competency-based apprenticeships that are registered with the federal government and the state government, where it's not a number of hours. It's benchmarks if you achieve the skill level. It varies by occupation, even within the construction trades. And that's the way the registered apprenticeship is set up.
We want to see a lot more multi-employer intermediaries out there, right? So when you start thinking about the groups that are actually, managing this process, because, a lot of employers are actually working with intermediaries just so that you can actually share this pool of apprentices that you're training up across different employers. And also then you have more of an industry kind of recognized or standardized set of competences that are actually being trained as well.
What does a multi-employer intermediary look like? Is it like Catalyst, your company?
Catalyst is an intermediary. Intermediaries is really kind of the people between the apprentice and the employer, ultimate and employer. And it could be the form of training providers. You see placement providers out there. I'd also put in there's a lot of nonprofits who are doing this. I'd even put chambers of commerce, right? Now, there's a lot of different sort of groups that are kind of really kind of trying to help connect that process between employers and apprentices. But generally speaking, when we're talking about intermediaries today, they are people they're the ones who are providing oftentimes the training and the placement of apprentices.
The AICPA, the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, is a sponsor of a multi-employer apprenticeship in finance and accounting. And the Wireless Communications Association, the telecom folks, they have registered apprentices, multiple employers dealing with all the stuff related to the internet.
Are these mainly trade association types? I would imagine that in the tech world, it may be different.
In several states, not in Maryland yet, their hospital associations are the ones who have created nursing apprenticeships. One of the things we talk about in our report is the public sector. The public sector ought to be doing a lot more apprenticeship. They are. The governor's administration is scaling them up in state government. But we also need them in local government. So, for example, there are police apprenticeships. There have been for 35 years.
I have asked so many of my students to do them, and nobody wants to do them. I can't explain it.
With all due respect, people who are taking political science courses at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County are a self-selected group of people. They're not a cross-section of the population of Baltimore County.
My students are mostly first-generation landed immigrants from really low-income families. That's who my students are. I have said to them, go to the police. But my students, they're not willing to.
That's making, I think, the larger point is that we've set up this system that screens people out by encouraging them to go to college. So we're leaving out of the pool most of the people. That's one of the great advantages of starting apprenticeships in high school, where you have kind of a universal pool before people have self-selected out.
My students move in and out of college. They are in college one semester. They're not in college one semester.
Sure.
You keep making a big line between those that go to college and those that don't. But there isn't that much of a line, to be honest with you, especially at the what I call my shop, right? Which is the democratizing edge of higher education. I understand the computer science department in College Park is different. I am not the computer science department in College Park. I am a political science department on behalf of UMBC at the Universities of Shady Grove in Montgomery County, teaching first-generation college, first-generation immigrant, low-income students who most of whom are working. When I speak of them, they are the people that need those apprenticeships that you're trying to build.
They could be, and I'd be happy for them to be. Most of the folks of their age and their background are not taking political science.
They are not taking political science, that's for sure. That's why we have a show.
That's my point.
And that's why we have the January 6th insurrection. So I'm not sure I want to go down that path to say studying politics
You're
is a bad
blaming
idea.
January 6th on the students who don't take your class?
No, I'm saying that we neglect civics education.
I agree with that.
That's the point. And so if we had civics education, it would be different, I think, both for the country and for the program.
I'm all for civics education. I've been pushing and supporting in every possible way over the years. But the importance of high school as opposed to post-high school is when you have the full marketplace in K through 12, in elementary, middle school, and high school, that's where you really need civics education. Because then you're reaching more or less the whole population. And we do it, and I'm not saying we don't do it. But doing it for people who can afford to take the time and put up the money to take a college course is screening most people out. That's just the way the math works. That's all I'm saying. And I'm sure I'd love all 50
I would
of your kids.
love to have much more civics in high school.
Right.
And if we had that, I can assure you that it makes sense to take a political science degree. Look, we have also not just a college fetish, but a STEM fetish. Public officials make STEM the place where all smart kids need to go. I reject that proposition. My students are very smart. My students do very well. They need all the help that they can get, including, I think, apprenticeship. With the police apprenticeship, because I only brought this up because of the police apprenticeship. You have no idea how much I have pushed that apprenticeship.
Well, good. God bless you. God bless you.
But without success is what I'm saying.
I understand.
Well, I'll also mention about this STEM thing, because obviously that's near and dear to my heart. I can tell you what I tell my kids now, right? As a person who's in tech, who's active in it, is that I actually think maybe this is the right time to go the other way. In fact, I actually been telling my kids, maybe you shouldn't be thinking about tech and finance and all these skills. Maybe you should be thinking about a broad liberal arts education at this point, because I think in the future, the net effect of a lot of this technology is going to commoditize tech, right? It's going to commoditize those exact skills. And so what will have value is those things that are uniquely human, those human things that machines cannot do.
Jim Rosapap, Jake Shue, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Sunil.
Thank you.
What lessons should we draw from my conversation with Jacob Shue, the chair of Maryland's Apprenticeship 2030 Commission, and Jim Rosapap, state senator, who also served on the commission? First, a narrow look at how to do workforce development became a broad indictment of traditional education. The purpose of higher education, heck, all education, has been controversial since the beginning. Education provides skills to students to use to live a productive life, but they also provide the knowledge and organization skills to reorient as times and technology changes. Baltimore tech entrepreneur and commission chair Jacob Shue, I thought, brought the conversation to a really interesting end, where he said that AI is commoditizing technology, and maybe the redirection now should be towards human things, what only humans can do. Will the apprenticeships he offers through his company, Catalyte, and those that he is recommending in his commission's interim report, move in that direction? Second, Shue's company, Catalyte, is an example of a private apprenticeship intermediary and a model for marketizing workforce development. If unions have been the gold standard for apprenticeships and trade associations are stepping up, does private industry have a model to offer where multiple employers can train their workforce together? Unions and trade associations have an advantage, of course. They control, in some sense, the shop floor and its contemporary equivalents. Will commercial staffing company models bring new employers to recognize that registered apprenticeships are, in fact, a viable model? Senator Rosapap said that the reason the construction trade has strong apprenticeship programs has to do with federal law that requires prevailing wage for all workers working on federal construction contracts, except for journeymen who are believed to be learning on the job. The wage differential between a regular worker and a journeyman had to be a strong motivation for employers. We can imagine outsourcing as a method for allowing wage differentials, especially in staffing company operations. Lastly, all these proposals will require further changes in the way high schools and colleges work. If Maryland wants 45% of its graduating high school seniors to have had apprenticeships, they will need to rework bell schedules and sports. I can't tell you what school boards are headed toward with that. Senator Rosapep repeatedly brought up the comparison of public investment in state colleges and universities and in apprenticeships. A redistribution of resources along those lines, especially to private intermediary companies, would in fact be hotly contested. There is a link to the Commission's interim report in the show notes. Happy reading. Music for this episode comes from CatScan, an art pop rock band from Washington, D.C., Paul Chaparas on bass and vocals, Kevin Kingsley on guitars and saxophone, and Mason Shelby on synths and percussion. Their latest album reflecting the time and this cultural moment is called Everything is Normal. To feel better, go see them live. You can find out where they are playing on their Facebook and Instagram pages. If you have difficulty finding them, we share their events on I Hate Politics socials. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.